I think there was various different people who did well in the debate. I think really the top line is it seemed like Klobuchar got the most out of the debate and got the most at the expense of Pete Buttigieg, which from the perspective of someone who is hoping that that Sanders pick up support or is able, that New Hampshire is helpful to Sanders, that is sort of the best case scenario. And that presumes, of course, that Biden is already faltering. Here is Pete Buttigieg's defense of his South Bend, the record of policing in South Bend. And, kudos to to Linsey Davis, who was asking the questions because she did not let him. It really is amazing to listen to this guy answer a question because he really is. This consultant speak is so fascinating. And I have to say that I think there's been a real failure by the political entrepreneur class to not create like one of those Buttigiegisms generator where you just plug in any question and it just comes back with a platitude. Like, I don't know how you guys have failed to create one of those websites. I don't know who needs to hear this, but this should be easy for somebody. But it's all just sort of, we've got to go backwards to go forwards. And then we'll find ourselves in a place that is actually beyond where we would have been. And that's what we need to do to get this country on the right track. Like, I feel like every answer is a derivation of that.
He had a good one during his town hall on Thursday, which was, and then he posted it to his social media accounts, which is, the shape of our democracy is the issue that affects every other issue.
That's true. I mean, it's the shape of our democracy. It's such a weird sort of, I don't even know what that means. Like, the health of our democracy? Does he mean?
No, the shape of
the shape.
Like the arc of, righteousness, or whatever Obama said, the arc of the universe.
He's trying to come up with his own. Like, we got to A/B test this. But here is his response to something that's actually real. And that is his failure as mayor to not just like lower listen to this.
I want to turn now to criminal justice. Mayor Buttigieg, under your leadership as mayor, a black resident in South Bend, Indiana, was 4 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana possession than a white resident. Now, that racial disparity is higher than the rest of the state. In fact, it's higher than the rest of the nation. And that disparity increased in South Bend after you took office. When talking about the problem on national terms, you've called it, quote, evidence of systemic racism. But you were mayor for 8 years, so weren't you, in effect, the head of the system? And how do you explain that increase in black arrests under your leadership?
Well, the reality is, on my watch, drug arrests in South Bend were lower than the national average, and specifically to marijuana, lower than in Indiana. But there is no question that systemic racism has penetrated to every level of our system, and my city was not immune. I took a lot of heat for discussing systemic racism with my own police department, but we've got to confront the fact that there is no escaping how this is part of all of our policies. Earlier, we were talking about opioids, and thankfully, America has come to a better understanding about the fact that opioid addiction is best understood as a medical problem. But there were a lot of people, including a lot of African-American activists in my community, who have made the very good point. It's great that everybody's so enlightened about drug policy now when it comes to opioids, but where were you when it came to marijuana? Where were you when it came to the crack epidemic in the 1990s? That is one of the reasons why I am calling for us as a country to take up those reforms that end incarceration as a response to possession, and make sure that we legalize marijuana, and when we do it retroactively with expungements to correct the harm done in so many cases of incarceration, disproportionately.
I pause it for just 1 second because he's just about to finish, and I just want to just remind you that he is so far from where the question started that he's got to be thinking like mission accomplished. This is what you do as a politician. Like, I know this is what David Plouffe did when Hayes was asking him about like his relationship to acronym. It's just like you start there and you just immediately go off. And the idea is like, oh, everybody's forgotten what the question is. The question was, how come when you entered into the mayorship, the thing that you decry, which is the outsized ratio of arrests of black people for drugs, increased from where it was before you were mayor. And now he's on to like the idea of in the future, we've got to expunge the records of people who apparently, like, I was mayor when they got arrested for pot smoking. But kudos again to the questioner, Linsey Davis, because this.
Expungements to correct the harm done in so many cases of incarceration, disproportionately of black and brown Americans, where the incarceration did far more harm.
Right. I
want
to go back to the original question, though. How do you explain the increase in black arrests in South Bend under your leadership for marijuana possession?
And again, the overall rate was lower.
No, there was an increase. The year before you were in office, it was lower. Once you became in office in 2012, that number went up. In 2018, the last year that we have a record for, that number was still up.
Yeah. And one of the strategies that our community adopted was to target when there were cases where there was gun violence and gang violence, which was slaughtering so many in our community. Burying teenagers, disproportionately black teenagers. We adopted a strategy that said that drug enforcement would be targeted in cases where there was a connection to the most violent group or gang connected to a murder. These things are all connected, but that's the point. So are all of the things that need to change in order for us to prevent violence and remove the effects of systemic racism, not just from criminal justice, but from our economy, from health, from housing, and from our democracy.
So if we are to understand what Buttigieg is saying, is that the reason why drug arrests went up is because now they connected it to gangland murders. And that's why we started targeting people for drug arrests when they were involved with murder. And that's why the figure went up, which means that there were like even more murders that did not involve that's not possible, folks, unless South Bend is like, you know, I don't know, like Honduras. It's like the most dangerous city in the world. Like you can't walk down the streets without there being a murder.
Yeah, when you go to Notre Dame, actually, my cousin told me when you do a tour, they give you all flak jackets when you walk around.
I mean, that's the only way to explain what he said. But the important thing for you to walk away is it's all connected. Everything's connected. And therefore, it's connected to our democracy. And things that are connected to our democracy need to change. That way, everything that's connected will also change.
And then the shape of the democracy begins a whole new form.
Once you change the shape of democracy, and then he's got to do the exclamation with the hands that shows that he understands the heft of the problem. Because he's communicating to you. He understands this is a heavy problem. And once you find the shape of it and the weight and the connectivity, that connectivity is what makes things connected. And therefore, if you fix one part of it, because it's connected, you'll have fixed the other part of it. But we can't go back unless it's in the process of going forward. And that's what I want for America. Yeah. That's how I would have run in the Libertarian primary.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yep. It's too bad, too.